Good morning, friends, and welcome to First Christian Church of Glasgow. And I have our friend here, Orange Cat. I don't know that you've met old Orangey. She is our third oldest cat, and really sweet, a little bit of ornery. And she was really excited. Her favorite book of the Bible is Numbers, so she wanted to join us today. And her tail, she wanted to learn more about the Hebrews' travels on their way to Canaan. And last week we talked about Aaron and Moses and Miriam, the sister, and the Hebrews who were complaining. And so we're still in the desert at this point in time, and the Hebrews are moving the tabernacle as God instructs. As they get a little closer to Canaan land, the promised land that God had promised to return the Hebrews to from after their enslavement in Egypt. And so they were really, really close to Canaan, just on the outside. And God told Moses, send spies into Canaan, one from each of the tribes of the 12 tribes of Israel. And so the 12 were selected, one from each tribe. And they were gone 40 days, in which time they returned, and they brought a report that the land was, had marvelous fruits that they could eat, and they described it as flowing with milk and honey, which is a kind of a phrase to suggest that this is an abundant land, great to live in, provide for them, which sounded so good, I suspect, after being in the desert for several weeks at this point in time. But the guy said, we've got some bad news. The people who live there, the men, are really strong, and I don't think we can defeat them. We just can't beat them in battle. We can't go to Canaan. They're just too many of them. All of them said that except one. One of the spies, named Caleb, said, no, we need to trust God. Yes, they may be strong men. There may be many of them there, the Canaanites. But we have God, and with him, no one can defeat us. And so, Caleb showed incredible strength and trust in God. But unfortunately, the other spies, their arguments won out, and the people, the Hebrews, were scared and fearful, and they didn't want to go into Canaan, despite the fact that God had promised them he would give them this land. And so the people rebelled against Moses, saying, why did you bring us this far out of Egypt, if you couldn't deliver and, take us all the way into Canaan? And God heard the complaints of the Hebrews, which was a fairly common theme. And, God said, how long should I have to deal with these unbelieving people? On 10 occasions they have turned against me and what I said. And despite all the miraculous things I've done, they've just refused to believe in my power. And Moses once again interceded for the Hebrews and said, please forgive them, God. They just don't quite understand, your powers and all that you're able to do. And God said, okay, I'll forgive them, but there's still a consequence here. None of the people that are alive today who have complained here will be able to go into the promised land. You all are going to wander in the desert, and until all of them are dead, and then new people are born in these families. The new people will be able to go into the promised land, but the ones here today cannot. All except Caleb. Caleb and his family will be able to go in. So the punishment did not apply to him because he was faithful. And so, it's kind of interesting. You hear a lot of times that the Hebrews were lost in the desert for 40 years. And in fact, they were in the desert for 40 years, but they were not lost. They knew exactly where Canaan was during those 40 years. They just couldn't go in because God told them they couldn't. After initially wanting them to go in and they refusing, their disbelief. Even though they were forgiven, there was a consequence and a punishment that they had to endure. And when we sin, our parents or our guardians, they forgive us, but they still will often give us a punishment Forgiveness does not mean there's no punishment or no consequence. It just means they're still going to love you afterwards. And hopefully that punishment consequence will encourage you not to repeat that sin in the future. So the Hebrews wandered in this desert. They're below Canaan, south of Canaan, for 40 years. And while they were there, God gave a few more instructions about the priestly garments. As you remember, the priestly garments would have a breastplate with all these gems on it. Well, God wanted them to make some fringes on the corners of the garment, and then a blue cord on the fringe of each of the corners. And that way, when they saw that blue cord in the fringe, they would remember all of the commandments that God had given them, those 10 commandments. And so even today, a lot of the rabbis, the Jewish priests, will have these cords on the fringe on their priestly garments with the blue cord as a symbol for that. And I'm going to do a little short lesson today, since I kind of did a long one last week. One thing I want you to remember, just because the crowd, the majority of people want to take a certain act, understand that doesn't necessarily make it God's will. As you study the Bible, as you get to learn about God and what He wants and what He doesn't want, you need to trust your instinct. Don't go with the crowd if your instinct tells you that what they're saying is not right. We need to have the strength of Caleb, where, if we know right is right, we need to stand up for it, even if we're the only one. We need to have the Caleb's courage. We need to do not what is popular, but what is right and what is God's will. And through that, it may be painful to do that. You may become unpopular. You may be mocked and made fun of among your friends at school and work. But God will know and stand by you, and you will receive a reward. It may not be a reward here on earth, but it certainly will be an award in heaven when that time comes. And that's an award that will be with you eternally. And the thought of, being in heaven for eternity, it's just so hard to get my head around what that means. My old Sunday school teacher used to tell me that, trying to describe eternity, what it would be like is if you had a space shuttle, if you took a little thimble, a small little cup, smallest little cup you can think of, went to the ocean and filled it up, the little itty bitty cup, put it on a space shuttle and flew it to the moon and dumped it out, and did that once a month until the ocean water was dry, that you would not have even begin to start eternity. And that just blew my mind when he gave me that. Because how long would that take to actually dry up the water, the oceans, with a thimble? Oh goodness, gives me chills to think about. So, never be fearful to stand up for what is right, even if you're alone. And God will be there with you and will reward you. So, last week I gave you a week off from your workbook. So this week we're going to do a little extra, and it's not too bad. We're up to page 155 of Finding Your Way Through the Bible, and I'm going to have you do page 155 through 162. So I think that's about 8 pages. That's not too bad. They're just some really quick review questions. Again, just reminding you of what you've already learned about how to use the Bible. So hopefully you're getting more proficient in that and getting more familiar and comfortable with the Bible. So, friends, I hope you've had a wonderful Easter week this past week, and as you think about your actions in the future, always stand with God, and that's what's right. You can do no wrong in that regard. I hope you have a wonderful week. You stay healthy and have a lot of fun. Until next week, I'll see you, my friends. Goodbye.